Well, while they're getting situated with mics, it's a good time for me to have the honor of introducing our first speaker. Kathryn Carlson is an award-winning video producer specializing in digital documentary filmmaking. Before beginning her freelance career in 2017, she spent 4 years working alongside photographers and journalists at National Geographic, creating more than 100 videos for its digital platforms. She's adept at pitching, producing, filming, and editing stories that cover both domestic and international topics. Her videos explore the intricacies of the human condition, as well as science and conservation in concise and impactful ways. She served as a producer and editor on 2 videos that were featured in National Geographic's special issue on gender in December 2016, which went on to be a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you all for letting me be here and inviting me, and I'm sorry that I'm recovering from a cold and croaking, so if you can't understand me or miss what I said, just holler at me as well. I will repeat myself. So, as she said, I am a documentary producer, cinematographer, and editor, and what that means is that I research, pitch, develop, film, and edit short documentaries, usually between 5 and 15 minutes long, that will go on the web. And I've covered a variety of topics in my time. And when the Pulitzer Center invited me to come talk here, and figure out ways to tell you how to bring the global issues into the classroom, I tried to think back on, when I was a student and what really impacted me and led me to my career path. And as I was thinking about it, I came across one pretty massive glaring memory, which was when I was in 9th grade. I was required to take either journalism or yearbook by my school. I opted in for a newspaper, and it was torture because I am terrible at writing. I have to write 1 article a week. I'm super wordy, I get really flowery, it's just like word vomit. It's a disaster. So I was miserable. But one day the teacher came in and said, okay, we need a new newspaper photographer who's interested. And then I did, along with every other student in the class, the whole avoid the eyes, like, don't look at me, I'm not totally going to take responsibility for this. And then she said, okay, well, whoever does it doesn't have to write a news article, ever. So both hands went up, me, please, God, me. And I did, I got it. And so, actually, that moment of selfishness and lazy attempt to, cut corners ended up opening a whole world to me. And I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that all of you have probably encountered students with those particular qualities or behaviors, and that was me. And, I continued on taking absolutely disastrous photographs. It was really subpar for the next 4 years. But every time I had a camera in my hands, my curiosity kept growing. The feeling I had when I was part of that storytelling mechanism was, insatiable. I couldn't get enough of it. And that moment of selfishness ended up being the first step that brought me towards the path of confronting my own ignorance about the world and finding value in knowledge and finding value in hearing other people's stories, even if I don't agree with them. So I ended up going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and getting a degree in photojournalism with a specialty in documentary filmmaking. And then I went to National Geographic and was there for 4 years, made over 100 videos on all different kinds of topics, from taxidermy to civil war in the Central African Republic. And so my day-to-day life was dealing with global issues and finding ways to communicate them to the American audience, which made up most of our work. And it was through working on those global stories that I got linked up with the Pulitzer Center to work on a story about widowhood. Amy Tunsing is an incredible photographer who has worked at the Pulitzer Center for a long time. And she and writer Cynthia Gordon got a grant from the Pulitzer Center to work on widowhood in Bosnia, India, and Uganda. And I kind of tagged on to that and ended up becoming a grantee a little later in the process. But this article was exploring, or this story was exploring, life after loss and what it means to be a widow in countries that, that value or devalue them because of their marital status. So just a show of hands, who has heard about the plight of widows in India? Okay. Who has heard about the plight of widows in Bosnia? Yeah. In Uganda? So, let me just give a little background. Bosnia, it's kind of a really unique and rare look into what widows go through. So back in 1999, there was a massacre of over 7,000 men and boys that were ethnic Muslims, Serbs, or Bosnian Muslims, and they were massacred by the Bosnian Serb army and buried in mass graves. And 20 years later, their widows are actually trying to find the bones and find enough of their loved one to bury. And there are more and more people that they're finding and amassing their bones every single year. And in these communities, the widows are actually honored for their terrible loss and for the sacrifice that their husbands and children made. But in India and Uganda, when a woman loses her husband, she often loses all social status. And what happens to her afterwards is unimaginable for a lot of people. So let's look at some stats. There are more than 259 million widows globally. Nearly half live in poverty. And worldwide, widows comprise between 7 and 16% of all adult women. A lot of the stats on widows are a little shaky because in these rural communities, census is not as accurate. But in parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, many are victims of discrimination, sexual assault, and the seizure of their property and children from them. In more than 30 countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, they deny women the right to inheritance, or they have absolutely no law that protects them. And then we get into child marriage. 18% of girls around the world are married by age 15. 47% are married by age 18. And often their husbands are significantly older than them, which means they will become widows at a very young age, have children that they have to support without a husband to provide for them, in a culture that doesn't support them going to school or having a job, because they have to take care of their family. And then, in a lot of cases, these young widows are forced into sex work. So this is an excerpt from Cynthia McBurney's incredible article called Life After Loss in National Geographic magazine. It's February 2017 edition, available online if you guys ever want to go read it. And I won't read this out to you, but basically what I want you to take from it is that what happens to a widow, what happens to a woman after her husband dies is often so dark, so drastic, that they are made so vulnerable that it is a human rights calamity to be a widow in many, many parts of this country, of this world. And because of that, the United Nations recognized June 23rd, just passed, as International Widows Day. So let's look at India, particularly. India actually has the largest recorded number of widows in the world, 140 million widows. I'm sure many of you have heard of the traditional Hindu custom, sati, which is when a widow commits suicide, usually by throwing herself in the pyre of her recently deceased husband, as a way to, basically it's the best, the most highest expression of a wifely duty. It is considered, or it was at the time, considered pious and holy to do that. But there were over 8,000 widows that performed sati between 1813 and 1820 before it was outlawed. But, the connotations of that practice are still being seen, the ripples of that practice are still being seen today. So expectations of widows in the current parts of a lot of India is they're made to shave their head. They have to give up their womanhood and their body, basically, remove their femininity because they have to be pious and live in mourning for the rest of their life. They are only allowed to wear white. They are never allowed to remarry, but in some places, only about 10% of widows in India ever marry again. The children belong to the family in many cases, and older widows usually become beggars, and younger widows usually become sex workers. And then, fun fact, they also are supposed to eat bland food because they are in mourning. And then there's this city called Vrindavan, which I think I've approached without pronunciation, so I'm sorry. But it's a city of widows, where between 2,000 and 10,000 widows have been abandoned. Their families will bring them from the country or wherever and drop them off and leave them never to be heard of again, no resources. They are a burden on that family in a lot of cases. 54% of women that are 60 years and older are widows in India. And deaths due to malnutrition are 85% higher among widows than married women because they cannot work, they're uneducated, they subside or subsist as beggars. Now let's go to Uganda. Widows make up 11.8% of Uganda's population. More than 56% of these women have a disability. More than 70% of these women are illiterate. Expectations of widow in traditional Uganda culture, which is, what the kingdom of Uganda reigned in Uganda for many, many generations. There's something called bride inheritance. So when the husband dies, it is sometimes assumed that the wife would be given to another male relative in the family, a cousin, a father, a grandfather, a son, a nephew, anything. They usually have no choice in that matter. Their children become part of the family. She is a belonging of the family. And any property, land, even pots and pans can be taken from them lawfully at the Uganda culture reign. 40% of widows now are victims of something called property grabbing, which is where, in tradition, coming from the Uganda culture, they do not believe that a woman is allowed to inherit land. And so in parts of the country where the law, because the Constitution, the 1995 Constitution is written in English, but it gives women equal rights to men. However, they're illiterate. They can't have access to go online and look up the Constitution. A lot of these places have police departments that are very, very, very poor, and so why would those police officers help these women who have no money? They're not supported by their government and often can't read themselves. Then 50% of the cases against property grabbing are violent in nature. 20% of these widows report attempts made on their life. 30% report threats made to their children's lives. And all in all, less than 5% of incidences are actually reported to police because the cultural norm is the law in a lot of these places. 1 in 3 widows will lose their home. So, in a week from now, will you remember all those numbers that I've just said? That's okay. It took me a very long time listening to this and writing about it for 6 months for me to remember all those numbers. And for the average person, those are just numbers. I mean, it's sad after hearing that, if you're in a conversation telling your partner when you get home tonight, like what I learned today, you'll say, wow, the plight of widows is really, really hard in a lot of places in India and Uganda. But I don't really have any emotional attachment to that issue. I can't empathize with that because I don't know these people. I've never experienced something like this before. It's so far from my understanding of my world that I can't actually process that information. And that's where character development and case study through journalism and photographs and video and motion graphics comes into play because it gives you a face to a statistic. It gives you a person to connect with on a human level where you can say, oh my God, my mother was widowed when she was 30 years old. And if she had had XYZ put up against her, what would my life be like now? It creates that connected tissue between the issue and the numbers. So we decided, because India's widow crisis is actually largely reported on, because they are the highest population of widows in the world. But Uganda, nobody knows about it, basically. Even people within Uganda know about it a lot of times. So we decided to focus on Uganda. And this incredibly strong, badass woman, holding a sword, or machete, her name is Betty. She is one of the strongest women I've ever met in my whole life. She's been widowed for 11 years. She has 1 biological son, but has adopted 3 children. She is HIV positive. Her husband died of AIDS, but never told her that he had it. He died after she had just given birth 3 weeks earlier to their son. She found out at the hospital that she was HIV positive, had a newborn baby, was illiterate, had no job, and had no husband. She comes home, and everything in her house is gone. All her crops have been taken, all her pots, and everything gone. There wasn't even a blanket for the child. Her husband's family had taken everything because they believed that she was a squatter. She didn't. That wasn't her right to have that material. All those resources. That was theirs. That was their brother, their son, their cousin's property, not hers. She would then face for the next 11 years constant harassment. She was robbed twice by them. Her son's life was threatened. They dug a grave on her property, saying, "Give us your land, or else your son will be there." So she is a powerful, powerful woman. And she faces, actually any woman who goes against the cultural norm in these communities, faces an expensive process, time-consuming, exhausting, dangerous. And they have in a lot of places, they have no resources themselves to pay for cops to actually come out and protect them. They have to find it. There are some NGOs that are helping them, which we will feature in this film. So, for the incredibly strong women that are fighting against this issue, like Buddy, there is change that is happening. So, please watch her story.
Ne bantwalako n'abaana bange.
Bannumba gye nkolera ne bansikayo.
Yagezaako kuntema n'ejjambiya.
Bagezaako kungoba mu maka gange naye ate nga sirina wala wenzira.
Bantiisa okunzisa n'abaana bange bwe mba sivudde mu maka muno.
Yagezaako okunkwata.
Ettaka lyange baalitwala sikyasobola kuliisa baana.
Bantwalako ebintu byange byonna emirundi ebiri. Bwe kubeera nnamwandu bwe kitegeeza mu Uganda. Olunaku olwo omwami wange lwe yafa lwali lwa nnaku nnyo ku sayidi yange, naye nze saamanya nti nno mulwadde wa siriimu yankweka. Ekyo nze nakimanya luvannyuma.
Enkuba bakubye ku lwaffe, enjala ewalume ku lwaffe.
Natandikirawo okuyisibwa obubi abaana b'omwami wange. Ntuuka awaka nagenda okudda, nasanga abaana babitutte, ne nnyingira mu nnyumba. Okuva ku buliri, sepiki, sowaani, ttaala, benseni, ne nnyingira mu nnyumba nkalu ate nga ndi nakawere. Ng'ate siina kyakulya, siina ssente. Ne nkomawo mu mbeera ey'ekitalo, mu nnaku ey'ekitalo.
Betty's story is not unique. It's what we see every day in Uganda. The cultural tradition around property grabbing is the effect that when a man dies, the clan is automatically entitled to inherit his entire estate, including his wife. So she's property. In Uganda, our work really is centered around securing the land rights for widows and orphans so that their home or land won't be taken away from them. In one of the districts where we work, 40% of widows come under attack. 1 in 3 actually lose their home. More than 50% of property grabbing cases are violent in nature. We must understand that in these communities, land is everything. Land is equated to life. People kill for land. If you have land, then you have a voice.
paka lwe nagenda nga neetetenkanya mpola nengenda nga mmanyira mpola mpola. Ettaka lino okusingira ddala nzijjako emmere ey'okulya, ndirimako emmere, ndijjako essente, mabega nga tebannayonoona bintu byange. Olunaku olwo lwampisa bubi nnyo. Ye mutabani wange oyo omukulembeze kansala ategeera amateeka eyaleeta abantu ate ng'abantu abo yagula bagule okujja okuntulugunya. Ne bajja n'emiggo ne bagisuulamu sitenseni wali mu kkubo, emmotoka ne ziyitako nga ziyita ku sitenseni mu mmotoka, ku mmere nga kweyita emmere eterimika, okulima banne nga kuzibu. Ne batwala ensolo zange ezaali awaka. Kale kyannuma nnyo okulaba ng'ente yange bagikubye neefa, okulaba nga bankozesa endagaano ku kifuba egaba ekintu. Y'ogenda kunkola ki? Gw'olina ssente mmeka? Onumpa waabirawa? Y'ononkola ki? Byenkoledde emyaka ne bigenda mu ddakiika entono ennyo bwetyo. Ekirala ekyasinga okunnuma, omukulembeze oyo wasajja kansala ye yaŋŋamba nti entaana y'omwana yiiri ngikulekeddewo, totawaana okusima entaana. Era ekifaananyi ekyo kyandaga bulala nnyo.
Buli lwe tujja eno mu nnimiro nga tuzolima, lwaki wankola ekintu nga kino? Nensiriikirira ne mpulira ennaku ku mutima, koleka nga bansimidde entaana ate nga nkyali mulamu, ng'alinga agamba bakola bubi okuzaala. Gamba Katonda alimpa abaganda bange abalala baali bampadde bonna.
The Ugandan government has tried immensely to protect widows, starting from the 1995 Constitution, which clearly stipulates that men and women are equal before the law. But the gender norms and traditions and cultures are so entrenched and deeply rooted in people's everyday lives that culture is what they naturally respond to and not the law.
Omukyala wano mu Buganda okuva edda teyabanga na ttaka era teyasikiranga ttaka. Omwami bw'afa alekera property ze siblings ze, abaana be abaazadde. Obuvunaanyizibwa baba balina kwe kulaba nti addukanya ebintu ebyo ku lw'abaana b'omusajja bwe yaleka. Naye weesanga nti tebakyakola gwa kutawula oba okulabirira, ate bakola gwa kugulambinga ttaka. Kituufu weekiri kaakati naye obwo buba bubbi. Ekika kyapuleyinganga role nnene nnyo mu kulabirira amaka ga so si poliisi.
The police are at the gates of the justice system. The problem is that less than 5% of property grabbing cases are reported to the police. Law enforcement has a duty to challenge them about their cultural values that contradict the law and bring perpetrators to account.
Tusoomoozebwa olw'okuba tetulina mwasirizi, tetulina ssente, tetulina maanyi, naguma ng'omukyala bw'abeera. IJM yakwata abaana abo bonna abaaliko ne wasajja. Era ensonga zikyagenda mu maaso, tuli mu kkooti.
Most times, widows struggle with having documentation to prove ownership for the piece of land that she spent her entire life building with her husband. It involves endless trips to the court, trying to find one single file. And then, of course, the people in charge of the archive store ask her for a bribe so that she can get justice. Very few are likely to follow up their case to fruition. Many actually give up along the way. I've often wondered why they don't just give in to the pressure of the members of their communities to just let it go. But there's something, I've not yet put a finger on what it is, that it's in some women that they won't settle for less. They won't be denied what they're entitled to, even if it means dying for it. Those women are special. They're really special.
Nayisibwa bubi nnyo kumpi nfe.
Nze n'omwana wange tetulina waka. Ngumya okubeera amaka gange.
Nsazeewo okulwanira amaka gange gano nga ndi mu nnyumba yange muno.
Nabatwala mu kkooti, omusango ne ngusinga ne babasiba.
Ali mu kkomera kati takyaddayo mu ttaka lyange.
Kati nnwanirira eddembe lyange nga nnamwandu.
Okay, so I hope the film did what it was supposed to do and made you associate, faces of real women with the stats that you heard earlier. So I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I would love to hear if any of you can think of a moment in the film that has stuck with you. Yes.
When the son was talking about not having siblings that love him.
Yeah, I was just...
And how the mother was
thank you.
And how the mother was right there just looking, knowing that she couldn't do.
Yeah, no, I was sobbing behind the camera during that interview. So great. Anybody else?
There was a moment when the narrator said that they came and beat her cow to death, and there was that image of the hole coming down. Couldn't see what was hitting, but it reinforced the narrative.
Yeah.
The strength of the women at the end of the final statements.
You know what, I was really thinking that with all the modern things that's happening around the world now with technology, I can't believe that it's still happening around the world. 40% of these widows are taken as properties, And this is really this is new to me. I didn't know that it's happening here. It's like during the old times when women are this property. It's still happening now.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, interestingly, artistically, when the piece opened, the women weren't speaking. It was narrated. And then at the end, they have a voice. So for me, that was very powerful.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was intending. So glad I found that. Are you going to say something?
Oh, I just, early in the story where she talks about she runs her husband's diabetes. She comes home with a brand new baby and she's got menses. And being a mother and 4 children, it's like the idea of having to start or go into an empty house with absolutely nothing and manage a newborn child, having just come out of the hospital, having just lost the emotional strain of losing a husband.
It's a question. How old children, when they become 14 to 16, 17, and they become strong males, will they start healthy in their minds?
Oh, they're already helping. The little boy this is her son, who is just an angel child. He's so sweet. He hardly speaks at all. He suffers a lot of PTSD actually from the encounter. Very scary, has many years. But one of the ways that she raises money is by cooking these pancake cookie kind of things, and he will bike into town and spend all day selling them. So he's not going to school. She was able to send him to school after she built her life back up, but then they came back the second time and took everything straight off her crops. And Brett wanted to understand, so she had to take him up. So he's already helping, as are the other children, except for the infants. But they just kind of wander around.
And then in the future, they will take care of the mothers.
Theoretically. I think he will. I think he will.
Is it in the culture? That's what I'm really trying to understand. And then will her children?
I think because they are victims of this as much, they empathize, like they love their mother, they see what happened to her, and they are victims of the cultural practice as well. In some cases, adult sons will actually take their, do this against their mother. They don't have that love or empathy, they see her as a burden. Or they agree wholeheartedly with the cultural practice that women should not inherit rights. So I think it's a mixed bag, but in this particular case, I do not think that he will fight her and he will support her. Okay, so I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to move along so that you guys have questions at the end. But, Pulitzer will provide you with a course lesson for this story as well as every other story that you have that you'll see over the next 2 days. But I do have a few suggestions as you take these films into the classroom on what to tell about with your students. First, there's the theme. In every single photo essay, reporting article, video documentary, there is a larger 1 or 2 word theme, usually a noun of some kind. Women's rights, poverty, family, love, that are these umbrella topics. And they are universal, right? Everyone can identify with those. Then you have the angle. So there are a million different combinations of how you can choose to tell one of those broad theme stories. And so you just need to pick or look for the idea that you think will resonate with your students, or a message that you want to get across to your students, and find that angle in your reporting. Then there's the character, as we talked about before, who is that connected tissue between the statistics and your the empathy that you want to instill in your students. And then I think most importantly is the purpose. Why do I care? Why do you want your students to hear about this particular lesson? Why was the film made in the first place? Did it accomplish what you think it set out to do? If it didn't, discuss why. Discuss how it could have been better. If it did, discuss why. Discuss how it was the best thing you could need to find understanding in that particular topic. So this is how Betty's story fits into those 4 categories. The theme was widowhood. That was given to us by National Geographic magazine in the pitch process. And then the angle for the magazine story was India, Bosnia, and Uganda, and the challenges that are faced in each of those communities. But for the video purpose, for my purpose, I wanted to focus on property grabbing in Uganda to raise awareness about an issue that so many people have never heard of before. Then the challenge was finding the right character. Luckily, Amy and Cynthia had already traveled and done the first leg of reporting. So she had all those people, the women that were at the beginning and the end, as well as the main character. Amy had already photographed them. So she had that personal connection with them already and knew what stories were in the current development. And if you think about Betty, she ticks off all these check boxes of people who represent groups within, women who represent groups within the Ugandan property grabbing crisis. She's a widow, of course. She's a mother. She's a compassionate caretaker. She's HIV positive, which 1.5 million people in Uganda are HIV positive. She's an impoverished woman. 20% of Ugandans live in poverty. She is marginalized. She's a victim of property grabbing, 40% of widows. She's a victim of violence, 50% of cases. She's a fighter. She is inspirational. She is trying to make change happen in her community. And there is action in her story. She's fighting this case against Washington right now. And I know many of you guys, especially in that back corner, the challenges to bringing global topics into your classroom is how do they apply? How do they apply to students who don't really care? And something that I think is really important in extending that message on is grassroots campaigns. International Justice Mission is a global organization They cover all different types of impoverished places, trying to bring a voice and help the marginalized communities. In Uganda, they're focusing on the widows. And they are doing it through hiring Ugandans to educate other Ugandans about their own culture and the law. They're doing it from the ground up. They focus on one district, the Wakona district first, and they're growing and building. And they're teaching the law enforcement. They have all these programs. That one cop that was going to the different villages and reporting on property grabbing cases, they have a little sticker on the back of their car that says, victim of property grabbing, call this number. So there are these grassroots movements that can gain momentum, bring it to the national scale, bring it to the global scale. And grassroots campaigns exist in every single community around the world, including Japan. So as I was saying, universal themes. Find these themes in each issue that you want to bring to your class. Find, I want to talk about women's rights, but half of your class is male, or 70% of your class is male. How do you make them care? Put it in the shoes of, what if you were that little boy and that was your mother? Give them a theme, give them something that they can identify with, and start from there. Start putting yourself in those shoes and experiencing that through their lens. Make it actionable. So how can your students help on a local, a global scale, or even raising awareness within their core community? Having conversations with, their parents about developments in our understanding of gender. Educate them on terminology, for example. And then they will bring that to their community, and that community, and that community, and it's just going to create a ripple effect of knowledge and curiosity. And give them hands-on assignments that make them talk to people that are different than them. Because we all live in a bubble. I live in a bubble. Even now, I live in DC. It's like, and then I went to Chapel Hill. It was a liberal bubble like this, and then you drive 5 minutes down the road, and it would be Confederate flags everywhere. So we all need our bubbles burst all the time. And I think it's the biggest lesson that you can bring to your kids. So find an assignment that makes them go talk to the local, maybe go talk to the temple, go talk to, anybody that is different from them, of a different race, of a different background, of a different social class, of a different belief, anything. Because that is what will broaden their understanding of the world and spark curiosity in these topics. Make it fun, right? Like, make it an event. Say you have a film screening every single month. You call it a film festival. And even give them something like a bingo chart that they have to fill out as they're watching the film so that they stay engaged and they try and figure out ways or moments in the film that hit those little markers. And then one thing that I think is really important from a storyteller's perspective is show people that the world is extraordinary. And extraordinary can mean so many different things, right? It can mean something like truly insane or unimaginable, such as, a particular community in Indonesia that lives with their dead, embalmed bodies of their dead for weeks to years because they don't actually believe that they're really dead until a certain number of water buffalo are slaughtered. So they give them food, they give them water, they teach them to dances, they embalm the bodies of their dead. That's extraordinary, fascinating. There's lots of incredible video images of that, so I'm sure your students will probably understand that. But then there's the other side of extraordinary, which is just how ordinary something is. Just how ordinary racial profiling is. Just how ordinary, child hunger is in America. That is extraordinary because we don't think about it. We think of, these third world countries, developing countries, that's where the problem is. It's not. It's in your own community a lot of times. And that's where you can affect change, is in your own communities, and then build up to a global scale from there. So I'd like to, in addition to the incredible resources that Pulitzer will provide you with, I have a few recommendations for you, including Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential Photographs That Changed the World. Now, I think you only have 1 or 2 middle school teachers in here, but I'm also not aware of how your school system works. So some of these images are incredibly graphic. And for everyone in this room has seen those images. Multiply that by 10. That's what you have on this Time Magazine. You click on an image and you see the actual change that came from that image publishing. And if you can bring that to your classroom, a select few that you think are appropriate for your course, and say, look, this image it did this. It changed the world this way. That will, spark that curiosity, spark that recognition of how powerful visuals and character studies are to the world and how we understand it. Another thing is if you are looking for a very data-heavy lesson or super complicated, very intricate story, really look into motion graphic videos or infographic videos because they use basically data visualization to communicate statistics and information to students. They're really fun, they're beautifully made, animated, which always kind of fun, reminds you of Disney. And I really love this particular style of learning. So in the top left corner, that's a video made by Skunk Bear on NPR that talks about how we all came from Africa and how from the start of civilization to where we are now, each continent developed, changed, built up their population. Super fascinating. Bottom left is incarceration in America. And America makes up a quarter of incarceration around the world. And then I'd also like to leave you with new media. Snapchat, news, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Not a lot of people raise their hands on those particular mediums in this room. But if, as Farouk said, if you did it in a classroom, that's where they get their news. And I am the first one to say that I cannot stand another Kim Kardashian story or another cat video about cucumbers scaring cats. I am a self-proclaimed cat lady, full-fledged. But I can't stand it. That's not news to me. But in the current digital age that we are, and in this current generation and future generations, social media is at the core of their interactions with other humans. And you need to meet them on those platforms. Journalism needs to meet them on those platforms. You need to train them about what is actually substantial media content. And, these things have a lot of bad things about them as well, but there have also been incredible historical moments that have come about because of this. Think of the Arab Spring and how Facebook and Twitter became the megaphone for the people in those countries, sparking a movement. Think of the Ice Bucket Challenge on Facebook that was like just taking up everyone's newsfeed and they were dreading being nominated so they didn't have to throw an ice bucket on their head. Well, that ended up raising $115 million for ALS, which a lot of people didn't even know about existed. Facebook, that was Facebook. Think about, remember that earthquake that was a few years ago, it was 2011? Remember that? People in my class learned about it seconds before the tremors hit us through Twitter. That's how fast news travels. Think of the Pulse shooting in the club. A girl's last moments were documented on Snapchat and published on her story. That particular story ended up helping investigators figure out the timeline of the Pulse shootings. This can be the impact of social media. And so ignoring it or pretending like, it's just millennials being, superficial and worrying about flower crowns on their head and making like little ears pop up, I don't think that's accurate. That's definitely a big part of it, but I don't think that's accurate. And so everyone that is going to be teaching and communicating these ideas needs to understand that in order to reach their audience and I think magnify that conversation. So this is like second to last slide, so we're moving on. But these are some resources I would really recommend. Of course, the Pulitzer Center, which has countless stories that are fascinating, come with lesson plans that deal with underreported issues. But there's also YouTube and Vimeo, which you just search topic documentary, infinite opportunity or options come up to you. New York Times, their opinion docs, international docs, are incredible. If you are dealing with public health at all, I would strongly recommend watching a film about an ambulance driver in Liberia during the Ebola crisis. It's a profile video and it is extraordinary. NPR Skunk Bear, this is the little guy right there. If you teach younger kids and you're really into sciencey stuff, he does an incredible job at data visualization, including like how old, he answers questions from classrooms. So one of the questions was, how old is your body really, considering that your cells constantly regenerate themselves? Jimmy talks about how in your intestinal lining, how often those cells regenerate, how often your hair cells regenerate, your fingernails, your eyeball, your heart, and tells you how long it is. He tells you how long it would actually take you to walk to the moon from the Earth if you never stopped. Just fascinating stuff. Vice is also great if you want really in-depth storytelling. However, definitely screen it beforehand because it can be graphic language, graphic material. But I think a really great resource. And then I'd like to end on this quote, which, if you said, it was written in 1961 by Kathryn Miller, who was an American playwright. But you sub out newspaper for journalism, I think it still rings incredibly true today because the conversation that journalists are supposed to have with the public is something that changes the course of history. It influences every single thing that the country becomes, does, the public understanding of it. It can control or destroy it. And in order for these issues all over the world to be amplified, you need to have journalism that doesn't just state the facts, but that provides testimonies and arguments and allows for readers and viewers to formulate their own opinions and talk about it with their community. Talk about it, figure out ways to get engaged. And if we can keep talking to each other, keep evolving our opinions, we're going to be more better. So, that's all I got. But here's my contact info. Please contact me anytime. I'm a freelancer based out of Washington, D.C. right now, and I'm about to be headed out of the country, so I'll be back in October. But if anyone has questions, I think we have like 5 minutes.
You can take 10.
10. Okay. Yes.
I have a question. Thank you. Incredible career that you've got going, and so many questions about things. I wanted to say what resonated with me about what you said about staying current. Let me just jump into that. When the mainstream corporate media reported that Donald Trump, the surprising outcome of this election, you were talking about the little bubbles. Even the media, we were all in the bubble, and it made us all say the surprising outcome. It wasn't surprising if you were in the little towns outside of, what did you say, North Carolina? Chapel Hill. So what you're doing is opening people's minds to those, what we would consider fringe areas, but then they don't become fringe when you take the world in total. So what I think some obstacles are include people resisting anything that has a subtitle, because people are speaking a foreign language, or people of color don't look like the mainstream entertainment media images, so they can kind of turn that off. So how do you make people plug into the story before they turn off? You know what I mean? Like, how did you end up crying behind the camera? Did you speak their language?
My translator was live translating. We were far enough away that I was like watching it on the monitor. It was live translating it to me because I needed to be able to respond and ask deeper questions. I had a list of questions, but based on her answer, that brought up another idea for me to ask her. That made me think of the sub-question that I think would be really important for a beautiful option to explore. So I absolutely understand what you're saying, and what you are saying is actually a massive problem around the world. And I worked at National Geographic, so our audience, kind of by definition, wasn't necessarily social issues. But that is not the case with every single audience. And so the way that I usually approach it is by actually hitting those universal topics. So when we made the title for this piece, we didn't, the Widow's Torment was like an artistic thing. But the actual title was something like, this widow's relative stole everything from her. Now she's fighting back. It didn't say where it was. It didn't really say what exactly was happening. But it hit on keywords that showed you or made people respond emotionally. They didn't need to know where it was. They didn't need to over-information. They wanted to learn about, that's interesting, what is that? And I think and I'm not sure if this answers exactly your question, but from our perspective, when we make these films, we try and find these universal topics that will resonate with people. And the information that we include, like you didn't necessarily hear Uganda until a little bit in. because that wasn't as important. You needed to connect with her and these women as a viewer, as a human being, and then you could get into the nitty-gritty. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
How do you see your role as in terms of giving people a voice and being an amplifier for them and balancing that with them being an advocate for them? I mean, there was definitely a clear side, and I was right there with you on that. Should you be less partial on things, or in an extension, how does an educator balance that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, we were trying for 2 weeks that we were there, and the 3 weeks before we went, to get to talk to Washington. But the International Justice Commission said that if we did, we could compromise her case. And that the Uganda government could use that against her case. And so he didn't want to influence that particular thing. So our voice of dissent was the Uganda leader, showing you that, like, he said, you know, this is culture. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but this is where we come from. And there is value in that. And there is, you know, in a lot of places, I mean, if you go back to traditional, yes, the women had nothing, but the families often took care of them. It wasn't like if you abandoned them or in that could go in the city. They took care of them. But in the current political situation where land means that you can make a living, that you can support your family, that trumps family. So I think being neutral, being able to see both sides is incredibly important. And it's a little harder to do in short film video than it is in long form documentary. But I think that you need to constantly bring up the dissenting voice, the other side, because it enriches the story and it allows for actual discussion to happen. It's not like brainwashing is a hard word, but it's not like talking at you, it's talking to you, if that makes sense. So as an educator, I would recommend having that question, you know, on that video sheet or whatever, like, okay, so this is that side of the story. What do you want to know about the other, about the other side's perspective? Can we do research to figure that out?
Well, thank you so much, and I'm sorry you're not feeling well. I really appreciate, you know, what you've given to us. What a treasure. I'm looking at this from the lens of an educator. Your story, the way you started out, you know, and told your story about how you got started in this wacky world that you live in, you know, because you didn't write or you didn't feel you were a good writer, and that there was this opportunity, and you know, you wouldn't have to write if you become a photographer. You know, putting a face to how career paths. I teach high school. You know, and this notion of going down tourism, you know, where kids who come from a fairly affluent community in which I teach, you know, get dragged to places that they don't necessarily want to go to, and their parents take them to cool places, you know, but seeing the possibility beyond tourism of the empathy and the lens that you give. Your story is so powerful. How you got into it. If somebody would have asked you, do you think you would have become an award-winning documentarist and going to the kinds of places that you do? I just want to say that that's the lens I look at it, to give a face to people like you who come from where you came from, the life that you led, fairly comfortable, and that you decided to become an activist by telling the story, and you never could have predicted that. So I just want to say, you know, that's an important place to start. And there was also a question, I can't remember if you asked it, how many of you have lived abroad, you know, when you were like, you know, standing up and telling your story. And get kids to start thinking about, you know, living an authentic, more than a week or 2 week vacation. This is something that, like, if I showed this and used this and told your story, kids could identify with you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think Rebecca was talking about wanting to bring journalists, or we were talking about bringing journalists into your classroom, whether it's via Skype or a conversation. And honestly, I think bringing young journalists and people of color, journalists that are people of color, for example, women who are often, I had about 300 pounds of gear when I went to Uganda, and I was showing it all myself. And a man came up to me and said, "Oh, you couldn't decide how many shoes you wanted, hey?" And I was like, like, yes, that shoes is definitely the reason I bring 300 pounds to Uganda. Yes, exactly. Thank you. So if you bring the people that, you know, maybe they see us like, oh, 5 years from now, I can beat her. I can beat her. Yeah. I think that that's inspiring. And especially, you know, I was a little nervous about telling that story because I didn't know if it was appropriate or whatever. But I talked to Reed about it. He was like, that will resonate with people. So many people start from that place. So definitely bring journalists into your story, into your question.
If you're going to use some of the resources that you showed up there, like Vimeo or YouTube, how do you get the kids to find like fact checking, or you know what I mean? Like how do you know that they're not just yeah?
No, that's a good point. So if I would say start with news sources. Start with Vice, BBC, USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post, the New Yorker. Start with those organizations because a lot of times they have articles or extensive captions that come with it. Or what you could do is give them a topic and tell them to find two sides of the same topic on video or YouTube. Because honestly, I would shot this and edited this. I went in knowing the story that I needed. And I made sure that I got it. Everything was truthful. But anytime somebody edits, even a text editor, anytime they edit a story, they are manipulating how you are interpreting this content. And that's just the fact of the trade. We are truthful. I would say many of us are truthful. And we want to give you that original context. But the other side of the argument is there. And so challenge them to find the same argument, two sides, and then form their own. That's where the talking with itself, comment comes into play. Let's talk about this. Love your own opinion.
One more question?
Yeah.
I loved it. It was very meaningful, not just for that particular woman or country. I think it resonates throughout. You know, there's a Chicago food program that was initiated this month for kids, and you don't have to be a student. So these issues are across all borders. I think incorporating in education visual media is very important. Not only it makes it clear, I'm a reader, I've got a house full of books, but filmmaking, using digital resources for students is very, very powerful for them. It brings it to life. Short films especially actually grabs their attention, and I think they learn they learn to imagine what it could be for their own lives. So it's not like just words on a page where they could kind of scan over things and not read it truly. I think it really engages them, and especially for different kinds of learners, visual learners especially, younger children, it's a great way to pull them in to what people want to teach, and it helps them understand a little better, maybe draw connections in their own community. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for listening and for being here. I hope you learned all kinds of